Hello. Okay, so I switched hotels to one that's a little bit cheaper, but the decor is crazy. It's kind of like a Beautiful Mind if it was, I don't know, uh, like more 2008 vibes. I think I'm gonna turn the. I thought it was gonna be fine. I thought it was gonna be like funny, but even just seeing my reflection makes my stress level rise. So I think I'm gonna switch the camera to this way. Also, what else is new? Not much else is new except that I slept in so late. It's Easter today, and I knew I wasn't going to be having a ham with my family because I'm in Seattle and they're in Michigan. Um, it's fine. But I totally slept in. The blackout curtains in this place are crazy, and I woke up and I checked my watch and it said 1, and it was one of those times where I had to check if it was AM or PM because I was like, how did that happen? Anyway, uh, I still have The Power Broker. Also, I started reading, I just bought this from a bookstore here. It was called Something Bay Book Company, and it was a really fun place to walk around. But I bought Say Nothing, which is another nonfiction book that people really like. And I read the first little bit, and it is so fun. It's highly readable. So that's fun. And then I also got so I have a friend named Hajin who does this all the time, and I never quite understood it, but she would get books on her phone, on the Books app, and she would read them on her phone, and I was like, "Well, okay, that's fine for you." But I finally did it because sometimes when you're laying in bed, having maybe this is just a psychological thing, but having your phone out feels awesome. Whereas, like, going and, like, opening your suitcase and getting the book and then turning the pages, that feels like too much work. So I also got a book on my phone. So I've been reading a lot here. Okay, anyway, let's start reading. It is page 313 at the bottom, the last paragraph. And the last time we were reading, we were talking about basically it's been him butting heads with Roosevelt for a while now. And I feel like it was kind of just more of that. Oh, the bathhouses were getting so jam-packed because everyone was coming to the beach. That was happening. That was pretty much what happened. Everyone was using these beaches. And he was like, we need some more beaches, okay? And the projects moved. Oh, yeah. And then it was the Great Depression. And still, he's getting massive increases in parks funding. Hello. Yes, it's okay if you're behind. Um, I'm trying to think of what happened that's major. In the past, like, week or so of me reading, Roosevelt became the governor. Roosevelt is a little bit more stingy, but overall he's still spending because everyone loves the parks. Uh, and yeah, it's the Great Depression, and Robert Moses is still building parks, and everyone loves them. Okay, and the projects moved forward. In 1931, the Southern State Parkway was extended from Wantock to Massapequa. In 1932, from Massapequa to Amityville. The public marveled at the fact that there was a route clear across Nassau County without a single traffic light or intersection. Park facilities were constantly being expanded. A new bathhouse, chlorination plant, and playground were built at Valley Stream State Park. 10 tennis courts, a miniature golf links, and a bridle path at Hempstead Lake, a whole new bathing beach, and a spacious stone bathhouse at Heckscher, a causeway to open up new portions of the beach at Sunken Meadow, a loop drive at Montauk Point, and the picnic tables, campfire sites, and acres of new parking fields mounted by the hundreds. Some measure of the scope of Moses' achievement is afforded by attendance figures. The number of visits to the Long Island State Parks approximated 3 million in 1930. The total number of visits to all national parks in the United States in that year was 3,400,000. More than not opposing such a program, a governor would want to be identified with it. Roosevelt was not present at the first two opening ceremonies Moses staged during his administration. the plaque unveiling at Heckscher State Park, and a ribbon cutting on Southern State Parkway. The state representative was Lieutenant Governor Lehman, and at least one source says that the reason was that Moses, to teach Roosevelt a lesson, invited Lehman instead of him. But after a working relationship was evolved between Moses and Roosevelt, all of that changed. When the Jones Beach opening ceremonies were held, Roosevelt was there, having been wheeled up on the boardwalk on a ramp Moses had thought to have constructed. When it came time during the gubernatorial election year summer of 1930 to mortar into place the cornerstone for the West Bathhouse, it was Roosevelt who was invited to wield the trowel and to tell 75,000 cheering onlookers that that building, which he said would cost $600,000, would help ensure health and happiness for generations of New Yorkers. 75,000 is a huge number. I'm just thinking about how that's like my only the only way I measure numbers of crowds like that is in how like in like stadiums, and my college stadium was the Big House at Michigan is just known for having the biggest football stadium, and that was like 108,000 people. So to think that he had almost that many just for a little for a bathhouse opening ceremony at the beach is really crazy. Moses also invited the governor to tour all the Long Island parks. The tour was staged on a Sunday, and the Monday papers were full of pictures of the governor smiling out over the picnickers at Valley Stream and Hempstead Lake. When he arrived at Heckscher State Park, where bathers had been complaining about overcrowding in the bathhouse, Moses even let him be the one to announce, to cheers and applause, that ground would be broken for a new one by the end of the summer. It was the kind of publicity that money can't buy. Roosevelt was so pleased that in his speeches he called Moses Bob. In 1931, Moses invited Roosevelt to lay the cornerstone for the monument marking the start of the Northern State Parkway, and afterward, Moses's limousine led the governors to Jones Beach for lunch in the balcony restaurant in the new bathhouse, the construction of which had officially begun the year before. The attendance at Jones Beach that day was 100,000. To translate, that's one big house. And as word spread that Roosevelt was present, a great sea of faces pressed close to the restaurant. When the governor, feeling moved, made his way to a balcony over the bathhouse swimming pool for an impromptu talk, the bathers in the pool shouted happily up at him and cheered. Jones Beach had been an expensive development, the governor shouted back to them, but it was the best money the state had ever spent. If he recalled in that moment of euphoria that the bathhouse on whose balcony he was standing had cost $1 million instead of the $600,000 he had been told it would a year earlier, he did not mention the discrepancy. Ooh, this is fun. Okay. Al Smith was present at every dedication too. As long as Smith lived, Moses would never hold a cornerstone laying, a ribbon cutting, or any public ceremony of any type anywhere in the state without inviting the governor and offering him a prominent spot on the program. But Roosevelt couldn't even bridle at this. There was, in regard to the Long Island park system, more than enough credit to go around. Moses was fond of repeating at this time a quote often used in Albany. You can get an awful lot of good done in the world if you're willing to let someone else take the credit for it. Certainly Moses was willing at least to share the credit for the work he had done with the man he needed if he was to get more done. Okay, that quote I've heard before, just from Wikipedia stuff, because nobody who writes Wikipedia articles ever gets credit. I don't think it's ever happened. I've never heard of anyone who wrote a Wikipedia article getting like any glory from it. Except for maybe there's media cycles about like Jess Wade and some of the people that write biographies of women. But other than that, not really so much. And if accomplishment and willingness to share the credit for that accomplishment was part of the explanation for the increase in Moses's power under a governor who had no inclination to increase it. The accomplishment helped explain this contradiction in other ways too. One way is that no governor could sit in the executive chamber long without discovering just how incredibly hard it was, even for a governor, to get things, big things, done. No governor, having made this discovery, could look at what Robert Moses had done without being impressed, without feeling admiration for his ability, without a recognition of his extraordinary capacity as a public servant. And the proof of this is that through some of the letters and memos written to Moses by Roosevelt during the last 2 years of his 4-year gubernatorial regime, through letters and memos interspersed with others in which irritation and even rage are only thinly glossed over, for Roosevelt's personal animosity toward Moses never lessened. There runs a tone that is unmistakably respect. Welcome to those that are coming in. We're reading about how so the previous governor, Al Smith, loved everything Moses did. Roosevelt, FDR, he's a little bit less gung-ho, but as the people of New York are absolutely loving the beaches on Long Island, Roosevelt is kind of like, okay, this is cool. And also the budget is just ballooning. Like Moses is getting so much money because people are so amped on the beaches and the parks. Another way is that accomplishment proves the potential for more accomplishment. The man who gets things done once can get things done again, and the potential for accomplishment has very strong political connotations indeed. For political, if not personal reasons, Roosevelt needed to get things done. Furthermore, he was trapped, as all politicians in elected executive offices are trapped, by the inexorable equation of democracy and public works. Elections come every 2 years, or 4, and the official who wants re-election needs a record of accomplishment on which to run. Such a record, in the America of the first half of the 20th century, and perhaps in the America of the second half of the 20th century too, from a political standpoint, should be most ideally a record of public works. And it has to be a record of public works completed, roads opened, bridges built, housing project apartments occupied, bathhouses crowded with bathers, parks in which the happy shouts of children fill the ear and not just the imagination. It is no good still to be laying cornerstones on election day. By then, a public official in executive office must have ribbons he can cut, monuments to which he can point with pride. This is a requirement established by democracy as it has evolved in America. Yet the realities of the democratic process in America make it almost impossible to get a road, a bridge, a housing project, a bathhouse, or a park approved and built in 2 years, or 4. The governor who wants to find a man who can inject into the democracy public works equation a factor of personality so heavy as to unbalance it and to get public works projects built during the span of a single term of office has little choice if he is ambitious for political success. But to heap on that man more and more responsibilities, even though the giving of responsibilities carries with it the grant of more power. In this context, moreover, Moses' arrogance toward opposition was an asset rather than a liability to an elected official. Almost all public works arouse some opposition. Roads require land, and some of the citizens from whom the land must be taken do not want it taken. And if the opposition is directed at an elected official, it can be translated into votes against him the next time his name appears on the ballot. But by leaping to deal with opposition himself, and by dealing with it in a way that antagonized the opposition, Moses made himself a lightning rod, drawing the anger at the project onto himself and leaving the elected official unscathed. The official, therefore, could bask in the credit, at least some of the credit, from the majority of voters who until the 1960s worshipped public works projects in and for themselves, while escaping the wrath of the minority who opposed it. In 1930, the president of the Valley Stream Chamber of Commerce asked Roosevelt to inspect the worst grade crossing problem on Long Island, a spot in the center of the village. Roosevelt agreed, and when his limousine was surrounded by a large crowd of local businessmen and one handed him a petition to Public Service Commission Chairman Milo Maltby demanding immediate action, Roosevelt, in a grandstand gesture, signed the petition himself. Wow, it's crazy that this is the first time we're hearing about this Public Service Commission Chairman Milo Maltby. I feel like that would have been a character that was relevant. Maybe not. The gesture showed Roosevelt's gift for public relations, but having made it, the governor now had to provide some action. Difficult to do because the engineering problems involved were incredibly complex, and the railroad had threatened to tie the whole matter up in court for years if the state attempted to force a solution onto it. Oh, okay. Okay, so basically there's a railroad that's crossing the highway, and the railroad is like, "We're gonna sue you if you make us move." That's what I'm gathering. Having played the ham, Roosevelt needed somebody to pull his eggs out of the fire. That is a saying that I've never heard before in my life. Okay, yeah, thanks for the warning for the great food metaphor because that is I mean, we've already heard that Moses really likes to say you can't make an omelet without cracking any eggs, but never in my life have I heard, having played the ham, Roosevelt needed to pull some eggs out of the fire. I can't even usually you can guess where a metaphor comes from. I can't even guess where that one why would you throw an egg in the fire? I'm not gonna waste my time thinking about this. He selected Moses, who made it very clear that he was doing the job only as a favor. Nonetheless, his first glance at the problem produced a solution. Maltby turned it down. But when Moses wrote Roosevelt, "Under the circumstances, I must ask to be relieved of any further responsibility," the governor hastily interceded with Maltby, and Moses's solution was adopted, immediately easing the traffic solution and brought praise to Roosevelt for solving the problem, because it was really Moses. Okay, so it sounds like Mr. Public Works Chairman Milo Maltby is kind of a loser. No governor would interfere with an official who could thus No governor would interfere with an official who could thus spectacularly achieve on his behalf. He wouldn't interfere even when the official actually tried to strangle a colleague. The incident occurred in Moses' office in the State Parks Council suite. Moses was presiding over a meeting of the council's finance committee when Raymond H. Torrey walked into the room. Next paragraph. Torrey, a pudgy little man, a bird watcher, hiker, and lover of the deep woods who spent weekends building lean-tos on Adirondack trails so that other hikers would have shelter, had long been a symbol of frustration to Moses. He sounds like a wonderful guy. His very presence in the Parks Council offices was a reminder to Moses that his control of that body, while substantial, was not total. Torrey had long been secretary of the American Scenic and Historic Preservation Society, whose trustees had long been ashamed that they could not afford to pay him an adequate salary. And in the days of the Taylor estate fight, when Moses had so desperately needed the help of the society's park patriots, he had sought to cultivate them by naming Torrey secretary of the Parks Council at a salary of $6,000 per year. That's so crazy because meanwhile Moses makes no money. After the fight, when Moses, not needing them anymore, was scourging the patriots out of their parks and trying to wrest Letchworth Park from the society's control, he had reduced Torrey's salary as much as civil service laws allowed, and made his title a meaningless one, giving his responsibilities to his assistant, Henry Lutz. But civil service laws prevented Moses from firing Torrey, and he was a constant reminder that the society still had some say in Letchworth's administration. And Letchworth's Letchworth Park. I don't really know where Letchworth Park is. Let's look it up. Letchworth Park. I wonder if it's upstate. Yeah, oh, Letchworth State Park is so far away from New York City. It's over, like, in between. I don't know how good your upstate New York geography is, but it's kind of between Buffalo and Rochester, but more south. Also, David is calling me. I'm gonna say hi to him. Hello.
Hello.
I'm reading The Power Broker.
Oh, on the stream?
Yeah, I think there's only one person here, but
Hello, fans of The Power Broker.
he says hello.
Nice. Well, hey, happy reading.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, well, sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt with so many personal things, but my cousin just okay, this is so oh my goodness. My cousin is having a baby. This is the life is so oh, look at this is so cute. Look at my cousin and her ah. Oh, okay, don't she'll probably announce this on social media if she's telling the entire extended family, but it's probably her news to tell. So now I'm like, "Oh no, don't tell." Never mind. It's fine. This is so exciting. Wow. I have to text back. Yay, congrats. Aw. Okay, well, that's so fun. Happy Easter. It's probably public if she's telling, like, her aunts and uncles and cousins and stuff. It's probably public. It's probably fine. Wow, that's so exciting. She's gonna be it'll be the first, like, my grandparents, it'll be their first great-grandkid, so it's kind of exciting. Tory had proven a thorn in Moses's side in other ways too. He saw the fight over the Northern State Parkway route through the eyes of the dedicated conservationist, more familiar perhaps than any other man, with the beauties of the North Shore's glacial moraine. He didn't want a highway, no matter how beautifully landscaped, to run around it. When a newspaper article appeared supporting this view, Tory reprinted it in the Society's monthly newsletter. On September 12, 1929, Moses learned that Tory had provided information about Parks Council proceedings on the Parkway route to Grenville Clark, the attorney for the North Shore Barons, from whom Moses had been attempting to hide his maneuvering. He left word that Tory should report to his office as soon as he came in. Tory did so, walking in on the Finance Committee meeting. Cursing, his face alternately paling and purpling with rage, Moses began to heap abuse on Tory. Tory said that the information he had given Clark was information to which any member of the public was entitled. Moses then launched into a tirade about the reprinting of the newspaper article in the Society newsletter. Tory said that Moses had no right to tell him what he could print. "God damn you," Moses shouted. "What do you mean by doing something like that?" Tory was mild-mannered, almost invariably soft-spoken, and among his closest friends were Jewish social workers from the Lower East Side settlement houses. "I have endured many verbal assaults from Mr. Moses, and said little, because he is bigger than I am, and because we, the Society, have been almost alone in the council in our defense against his aggressions," Tory was to write. "But his manner and curses irritated me on this occasion beyond further restraint, and I retorted, 'You big noisy,' and then a racial slur that I have learned that I probably should not say aloud in a public forum, even if it's a quote, just imagine it. 'You can't talk to me like that.'" Lunging from his chair, Moses seized Tory's throat and began choking him. So violent was his rage that when Finance Committee member Jay Downer tried to pull Moses off, He was at first unable to do so and had to exert all his strength to pry loose first one of Moses' hands and then the other. As he freed Tori, Downer grabbed Moses around the waist to hold him and told the smaller man to get away. But as Tori headed for the door, Moses broke free, picking up a heavy smoking stand and match holder, 3-foot steel base and all, and shouting, "You goddamn son of a bitch," hurled it at him. Only the fact that another committee member, DeHart Ames, grabbed Moses' arm as he was letting go, the heavy missile made it fall short. Recounting the incident in a letter to Roosevelt, Tori said, "I was, of course, at fault for using racial slur that I'm not going to say," but added that Moses' conduct was only one example of his truculence and violence against anyone who opposes him. Under Moses' control, Tori wrote, the council has lost its original character as an advisory body of eminent citizens working amicably together and has become a vehicle for securing advantages for Moses, for granting favors for his supporters, and for supporting his hostility to any who oppose him. He asked Roosevelt to limit Moses' powers. When the governor did not reply, Tori gave his letter to the press. But Moses was not at all abashed. His only regret, he said, was that he had not been permitted to finish that crackpot. And Roosevelt, pressed for comment by reporters, would say only, "It is a matter for the State Council of Parks, and I do not figure in it." The only result of Moses' assault was that Tori resigned, allowing Moses to appoint Henry Lutz to his place, and the trustees of the American Scenic and Historic Preservation Society, realizing that their conflict with Moses had reached an intolerable pass and that they could not win, in 1930, gave up the society's control of Letchworth Park and its place on the Parks Council, thereby making Moses' control of that body absolute. Yeah, if you just, like, look up, slurs about Jews, it's probably gonna be in there. I just think life is the benefits are, like, none, and the risks are very high of publicly using slurs. Okay. Roosevelt wouldn't interfere even when he found out that Moses was discouraging Black people from using many of his state parks. But once again, worse word. Okay. Underlying Moses' strikingly strict policing for cleanliness in his parks was, Frances Perkins realized with shock, deep distaste for the public that was using them. "He doesn't love the people," she was to say. "It used to shock me because he was doing all these things for the welfare of the people." He denounced the common people terribly. To him, they were lousy, dirty people throwing bottles all over Jones Beach. "I'll get them. I'll teach them." He loves the public, but not as people. The public is just the public. It's a great amorphous mass to him. It needs to be bathed. It needs to be aired. It needs recreation, but not for personal reasons, just to make it a better public. Now he began taking measures to limit use of his parks. He had restricted the use of state parks by poor and lower middle class families in the first place by limiting access to the parks by rapid transit. He had vetoed the Long Island Railroad's proposed construction of a branch spur to Jones Beach for this reason. Now he began to limit access by buses. He instructed Shapiro, okay, this is the famous thing that everyone talks about him doing. He instructed Shapiro to build bridges across his new parkways low, too low for buses to pass. Bus trips, therefore, had to be made on local roads, making the trips discouragingly long and arduous. For African Americans, whom he considered inherently dirty, there were further measures. Buses needed permits to enter state parks. Buses chartered by African American groups found it very difficult to obtain permits, particularly to Moses' beloved Jones Beach. Most were shunted to parks many miles further out on Long Island. And even in these parks, buses carrying African American groups were shunted to the furthest reaches of the parking areas. and African Americans were discouraged from using white beach areas, the best beaches, by a system Shapiro calls flagging. The handful of black lifeguards, there were only a handful of black employees among the thousands employed by the Long Island State Park Commission, were all stationed at distant, least developed beaches. Moses was convinced that black people did not like cold water. The temperatures at the pool at that's so what? The temperatures at the pool at Jones Beach was deliberately icy to keep black people out. When African American civic groups from the hot New York City slums began to complain about this treatment, Roosevelt ordered an investigation, and an aide confirmed that Bob Moses is seeking to discourage large black parties from picnicking at Jones Beach, attempting to divert them to some other of the state parks. Roosevelt gingerly raised the matter with Moses, who denied the charge violently, and the governor never raised the matter again. Roosevelt would not interfere even when Moses, ostensibly to raise money for soaring park maintenance costs, further limited park use by the poor by instituting parking fees at all state parks, 50 cents at Jones Beach, 25 at the rest, in violation of the American tradition of free parks. There was a flood of letters to Roosevelt from depression-impoverished citizens who said they had to scrimp to get enough money for the gas to drive to the park, and that the extra quarter would be the straw that would sometimes make it impossible for them to afford the outing. Moses had announced that in some parks, there will be free parking space for those unable to pay, somewhat remote from the center. This, protesters said, would only make poor families pay a toll in pride instead of coin. Who would wish to be classed among those unable to pay? One asked. To come walking in from the remote parking fields would be to exhibit the badge of poverty. Roosevelt wrote Moses, I was a good deal impressed by the complaint. I also think 50 cents is too high. Frankly, I think the people have a legitimate kick. Won't you seriously take up the question of reducing the Jones Beach charge? Okay, I'm so curious what 50 cents in 1930 is today. It's $9.29. Yeah, I feel like that's kind of that is a hefty parking fee. That's enough to make me rethink a trip to the beach, like if you're just going for an hour. Okay, so will you take up the question of reducing the charge? No, Moses said. He wouldn't. And when Roosevelt pressed again, he brought out his resignation threat. Reducing the charge would force him to reduce Jones Beach maintenance standards, he said. The entire character of the beach would be changed. And if it was, I do not care to be associated. Roosevelt may have felt that the people have a legitimate kick. But in the face of such a defense, the governor punted. Not only did he drop his own request for reconsideration, when the legislature passed a bill prohibiting fees in state parks, he vetoed it. Not only does a governor not interfere with an official like Robert Moses, he heaps on him more and more responsibilities. No matter what the job was, it seemed, if it was difficult, Roosevelt turned to the same man. During 1930, 31, and 32, Moses, this is my third time saying Roosevelt. Moses handled more than a dozen special assignments for Roosevelt and produced results on every one. And if increasing Moses's responsibilities meant increasing his power, giving him more money to work with, more engineers, architects, draftsmen, and police to work with, well, the governors simply had no choice but to increase that power. By 1932, with the governor running for president, less able than ever to afford a public controversy in his own state with so popular a figure, if one of the two characters in the Moses Roosevelt drama was dominant, it was not the governor, but his appointee. The hatred between Roosevelt and Moses flared up only occasionally during the 4 years that the former spent in the executive chamber in Albany. But that passion and the desire for revenge that it engendered was only banked, not extinguished, and it never stopped smoldering. It was to blaze up in the open later when Roosevelt was president. But Roosevelt was not president yet, and he could not yet afford to indulge such a passion. In his dealings with Moses during his gubernatorial years, necessity was the mother of accommodation. Okay, I'm going to read a little bit more. Wow, this is, before this, Moses was like questionable at times, but he always seemed to be like, a guy with big dreams and like good intentions. Now you're starting to see like the evil moments. Um, yeah, this is a really crazy section. The uniqueness of Moses's relationship to the governor, of whose administration he was at least nominally a member, was emphasized when Al Smith finally decided to run against him for the Democratic presidential nomination. Moses calmly informed Roosevelt that he would be taking a few weeks off to work for Roosevelt's opponent. The Happy Warrior's last campaign was born and was to die in unrelieved bitterness. Smith had plenty to be bitter about. Roosevelt's systematic and pointed disregard of his predecessor had continued. Smith could not reconcile himself to the fact that a younger man, of whom he had been so fond, and to whom he had given the gubernatorial nomination, had turned on him. Friends who visited him in New York found that Roosevelt was becoming almost an obsession with him. "Do you know, by God, that he has never consulted me about a damn thing since he has been governor?" he said to one. "He has taken bad advice from sources not friendly to me. He has ignored me." And Roosevelt was not the only younger man who had treated Smith with ingratitude. The treatment he had received from Jimmy Walker had wounded him even more deeply. At the request of Walker's father, an old friend, he had taken Walker under his wing when the young legislator had first come to Albany, rooming with him, steering him up the legislative ladder, helping him time and time again out of the scandals in which he was constantly becoming embroiled because of his drinking, his compulsive philandering, and his inability to pay attention to the job to which he had been elected. I feel like the name Jimmy Walker fits of a guy who's having problems. When Smith determined in 1925 to oust Hylan from the mayoralty, Walker had asked Smith to make him Hylan's successor. Smith had told Walker frankly that he felt too worried about his playboy antics to do so. Walker had tricked him into changing his mind. He disappeared completely from the night spots that were his usual haunts and began to be seen in more respectable establishments with his wife. When he told Smith he was on the wagon for good, Smith secured him a nomination. But what Smith didn't know was that Walker had been engaging in all his old activities, but had been doing so in a secluded penthouse rented for him by a friend who had reasons of his own for wanting Bo James to be mayor. Okay, I'm getting a little confused about all the mayors, so I'm just telling you that in case you're also confused. I am not much help. And maybe you have it all straight in your head, and so then you can just get a little ego boost because you are smarter and have a better memory than I do. Safely installed in City Hall, Walker. Okay, wait. Bo James and Jimmy Walker are the same. Okay, thank goodness. That makes it all make sense. So which one became the mayor? 1920s mayor. Okay, Jimmy Walker, aka Bo James, was a Tammany Hall guy who was the mayor from 1926 to 1932, but then he stepped down because of a corruption scandal. And before him was John F. Hylan, and after him was an acting mayor, Joseph V. McKee, who was also a Democrat. And then after him, so Joseph V. McKee was only there for like 4 months in 1932, and then after him was John P. O'Brien. So lots of Tammany guys. Okay, anyway, that was a little. And then the next big mayor is LaGuardia. Okay, thank you. I'm so glad that you are guiding me through. Okay. Let's see. So, his friend, okay, so Jimmy Walker's friend got him a little penthouse, for him to drink and, stuff. Safely installed in City Hall, Walker had shipped his wife off to Miami for an extended vacation, returned to his public habits, and when Smith had left the governorship and lost power, Walker had begun ousting Smith's friends from key city posts to make way for his own men, called by one observer the worst element in Tammany Hall. Then Walker began taking over the hall. Smith could have stopped him, but determined to stay out of politics, he disdained to do so. When he realized the depth of the corruption pervading city government, he tried to reassert his authority, but by then it was too late. Walker was even able to force out Smith's man, Judge George W. Alvaney, as Tammany leader, with Alvaney attempting to save face by resigning because of ill health. It's crazy because Al Smith is also a big Tammany guy, but Mr. Jimmy Walker is just kind of being his own brand of Tammany. And then Walker publicly humiliated Smith. At the annual dinner of the Inner Circle, the press room regulars at City Hall, Walker paused during his speech, turned to Alvaney, and Alvaney is Smith's man, and with a glance at Smith that no one in the room missed, said, "How's your health, George?" The reporters laughed, and Smith knew that they were laughing at him as much as Alvaney. And when Walker handpicked Alvaney's successor, he chose Smith's enemy, John F. Curry. There was no place left for Smith in the party he had loved and led. All through 1931, Smith refused to run for the presidency. One by one, the state's key Democrats, Farley and Flynn notable among them, came to him and said that Roosevelt was asking them to join his campaign, but that their first loyalty was to Smith. All he had to do was ask them to stick with him, and they would do so. And all through 1931, Smith told them that he would never be a candidate for the presidency, and they were free to join Roosevelt, which they did. Okay, I need a little bit of water. Sorry about using a water bottle. I wonder how old Al Smith was in 1931. I'm like so curious because to me at this point he seems like he should be so old, but he's actually probably not. It's loading. Okay, he was born in 1873. So in 1932 he was literally like 59. He's not old at all compared to current presidential candidates. But in early 1932, Smith's bitterness spilled over. His intimates would long debate whether Smith entered the presidential race because he wanted the nomination himself or because he wanted to deny it to the man who had treated him so cavalierly. Probably both elements were mixed. Certainly, Smith was motivated by personal ambition. In 1932, he was, after all, only 58 years old, still vigorous and bored with the life of a businessman. He was motivated also by the fact that the Depression made election of a Democratic candidate, even a Catholic Democratic candidate, a virtual certainty. And he desperately wanted to prove that being a Catholic and an Irishman did not disqualify a man from the presidency. One visitor, listening to Smith recount how it had been the religious issue that defeated him in 1928, said he felt so terribly hurt, so outraged by that, And the point that he was making was that having been defeated on that issue in a year in which he was bound to be defeated, everybody, including FDR, should have stood aside to let him have the nomination in a year in which he could have been elected. He was very much wrought up about it. He pounded his fists and his voice got loud. He shouted at times in that conversation. But no consideration was stronger than Smith's feelings toward Roosevelt in pushing him at the last moment into a race foredoomed by the fact that Roosevelt had had a 4-year head start. Okay, I'm going to keep reading the rest of the page because then it's going to be chapter 18. Oh, and this next chapter is really exciting. Guess what the next chapter is called? They're really unpredictable. New York City before Robert Moses. We're about to jump back in time, it seems. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Okay, yay. Moses saw at once that the effort was hopeless. The Smith movement never had a chance, he was to recall. It started very late and really had no organization to speak of. He never let himself be deluded by those reminders of past glories, which gave Belle Moskowitz, Henry Moskowitz, Judge Proskauer, Herbert Bayard Swope, and George McLaughlin flashes of hope. The rallying of Walker and Tammany to Smith's side after Roosevelt had authorized Samuel Seabury to investigate corruption in New York City. The defection to Smith's banner of big city organizers and the consequent raising of his delegate counts to 201, the wild cheers of the tremendous throng that lined his route from the LaSalle Street Station in Chicago to the Congress Hotel, where a Smith for President headquarters had been hastily established. But practical realities did not weigh with Moses where Al Smith was concerned. Moses was one of those who struggled to end in convention maneuvering so bitter that Ed Flynn called it a fight to the death, who fought to hold together an alliance of dark horses that denied Roosevelt the nomination until the 4th ballot, who thought for a few hours, brief hours, that they actually had Roosevelt stopped and would be able to force the party to turn to Smith, and whose hopes were finally dashed when the ex-governor's old adversary, William Randolph Hearst, used his influence with California's William G. McAdoo and John Nance Garner, governor of Texas, to force the California and Texas delegations to switch to Roosevelt. Ooh, wow, and that was Smith's old rival that made that happen. Very dirty. Moses was one of the small group of friends who sat down with Smith in front of a radio in the Congress Hotel to listen to the last ballot, who watched the former governor haul himself wearily out of his chair as soon as California's McAdoo began the speech that signaled the California switch with a wave of his hand direct them to start packing so they could leave Chicago. And with a wave of his hand, he was like, let's leave Chicago. Okay. He was one of those who sneaked out of the Congress Hotel by a side door with Smith at the moment that crowds were jamming the front entrance to greet the arriving Roosevelt, who listened to the ex-governor's choice and who watched anxiously as who listened to the ex-governor, cornered by reporters, refused to say he would support his party's choice, and who watched anxiously as Smith sat silent on the long train ride home, with his face marked by what one observer called a tired sadness. Sorry, I'm really bad at reading right now. And if Moses accepted Smith's defeat with his mind, he never accepted it with his heart. A month after the convention, with Happy Days Are Here Again drowning out the strains of The Sidewalks of New York forever in the Democratic Party's consciousness, Smith's campaign staff held its first and only reunion, complete with a menu featuring Nuts McAdoo and Celery Farley and Branchless Olives Roosevelt in the Empire State Club in the Empire State Building. And Moses' contribution to the occasion reflected his bitterness. It was a quotation from Shakespeare that he selected for an epigraph on the menu's cover. Politics is a thieves' game. Those who stay in it long enough are invariably robbed. And that's the end of the chapter. It's crazy that they choose all the enemies' names to name the dishes of their lunch. Nuts McAdoo. I'm probably saying it wrong. McAdoo, maybe? McAdoo? I don't know. I'm going to stop there. Okay, next time it's going to be really fun because it is a new chapter, New York City before Robert Moses. Also, that last chapter felt really the pacing was so different. Like it was so it makes you remember that in this book they cut 350,000 words, and I wonder if perhaps some of the cuts happened around the chapter we just read, because I felt like we were just like breezing through these things that usually Robert Caro examines in exacting detail and depth. So I don't know, but well, there's the end of Al Smith's political career, I guess. I hope you have I can't talk. I hope you guys have a good Easter. I am still in a hotel in Seattle. That's why I have weird wallpaper. I showed people at the beginning, but the rest of the wallpaper is it's not personally my interior decor style, but that's okay because the hotel was cheaper than the other hotels. Also, I started reading this book, not reading aloud, just reading in my head. And it's so good. It's about, well, I actually don't even know what it's about yet. Basically, it's about a few people in the Troubles in Northern Ireland in like the 70s. And I don't really know what's going to happen, but there's going to be a murder. So I'm excited. It's Monday here in New Zealand. Well, happy Monday. See you later.